Today is December 6, 2011, and we are at the residence of Mr. Edison, Aaron Edison, and we are interviewing him about his military service for the West Virginia Veterans Legacy Project. Could you please give me your full name as it is recorded on your birth certificate?
Okay, Aaron Anthony Edison.
Okay. Do you currently or have you ever had a nickname?
I'm in a writing group, so I have a writing nickname, but it's only usually in the group. They just call me Moondog.
Oh, I see. So what would you have been known by in the military mostly?
A lot of people call me, actually they shortened my last name and called me Ed.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Where were you born and raised, sir?
Grafton, West Virginia.
Okay. All right. What did your parents do for a living?
Well, my father, he worked for the B&O Railroad for a while, and then we moved to Parkersburg, West Virginia, where he worked for Kaiser Aluminum up until the time of his death when he was killed in 1961 in a car accident. Mm-hmm. My mother, on the other hand, she finished school afterwards and went on to become a music teacher. And she taught different schools, Flemington High, Grafton High, and some others. Plus she was a music teacher and had students of her own and taught piano at our house.
Okay. Other than during your military service, have you pretty much remained in West Virginia yourself?
Pretty much. Yeah, the military moved me around quite a bit, but I always kind of gravitated back to these mountains of West Virginia once my service time was up. Yes.
Okay. Where did you attend school at, sir?
Elementary school was in Grafton, Westside Elementary, then Grafton Middle School, and then Grafton High School, and graduated there in 1974.
Okay. Is there anything about growing up around here that you'd like to mention?
Oh, it was a great place to grow up, actually, especially the little town of Grafton. Back in my day, there were a lot of kids in the neighborhood and that sort of thing, so it was always a great opportunity to just to grow up with a lot of good, close friends and that sort of thing. It was a quiet community, just a good all-around place to grow up. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Did you enlisted in the military, correct?
That's correct. Delayed enlistment program. 6 months prior to graduating high school, I signed up for the Air Force, but I had to wait until I graduated before I could actually go in.
Okay. Is there any reason that you can explain to why you would have done it?
Why I chose military? Or,
yeah.
I guess you would say I have a long family history of military service members. Like I say, as far back as my grandparents, my grandfather, on both sides actually, they both served in World War II. And then my father and his brother served in the Korean War, both in the Army. And then after my father's death, my mother did remarry, and so my stepfather had served in the Air Force as well. All of my mother's brothers, 3 of them, they all served in the Air Force. So when I was around 8 years old, I was living in Columbus, Ohio for a short period of time. And one of our neighbors was an engineer for sort of an aerospace engineer. He worked at Lockbourne Air Force Base. And as a kid, he came next door and chose to take my brothers and myself, along with his kids, to the Air Force Base on an open house, and I was sold. So I'd say from the age of 8 or 9, plus knowing the fact that all my family members had served in the military, and a lot of them in the Air Force, and with that experience, I was pretty much sold. And in high school, I joined what was called the Civil Air Patrol, which is sort of an auxiliary of the Air Force. They have a mission of their own where they do search and rescue missions for downed aircraft, both military and civilian. So I learned a lot about the Air Force prior to going in, and so by the time I graduated high school, I was ready to go. Okay, so there was no second thoughts about possibly another branch of service? You definitely were in the Air Force? I probably did give some consideration. I thought about the Marine Corps for a while. I thought about the Army for a while. I even had I had a lot of contacts through Civil Air Patrol up at Camp Dawson, which is an Army base in Kingwood, West Virginia. And from time to time we'd be up there for different things, and I would talk to all the Army guys up there, and a lot of them would try to talk me into going into the Army. But I think it was just the fact that all my uncles had been in the Air Force, my stepdad was in the Air Force, and I just loved aircraft. I mean, and plus my little 4 years with the Civil Air Patrol, I was really just kind of geared in that direction, so I pretty much knew that's what I would do.
Okay. How long did you remain in the Air Force?
Well, I had breaks in my service time. I went in, my first enlistment was in 1974 to, well, that was July of 1974 to November of 1979. It was about 5 years, 3 months, and 10 days to be exact, and I was an aircraft mechanic. So after that 5 years was up, I got out of the Air Force, came back to West Virginia to go to college. And while I was in college, my brother Donald, my older brother, had just gotten out of the Army as well, so we were both going to school together. And he joined the West Virginia Army National Guard unit in Fairmont, and subsequently kind of convinced me into doing the same. So for 3 years, I joined the West Virginia Army National Guard. Once my enlistment was up with them, I then joined the Air Force Reserves in Pittsburg for another 8 years, and then subsequently, and my final enlistment was with the Pennsylvania Air National Guard, where I kind of finished up about 7 or 8 years with them, and then retired in 2001, August of 2001. So altogether, I had 23 years of military service.
Okay. For your basic training, how did you just attend one basic training? One
basic training. Yeah, that's all that you're required. Right out of high school, I graduated in June of '74. And by the 22nd of July of the same year, I was going through basic at Lackland Air Force Base down in San Antonio, Texas.
Okay. All right. Is there anything you'd like to say about your basic training? I mean,
it was great. I think that's the experience that all military folk, they'll never forget. Your drill sergeants, or we call them training instructors, or TIs. And when I went in, the Vietnam War was still officially ongoing. The Vietnam War didn't actually end until '75. So when I got to Lackland Air Force Base, there were a lot of troops that they were still processing through basic training. And some troops even had to wait in hotel rooms until a basic training flight actually came open for them to take part. But there were a lot of troops there. There was the intensity was really high. It was just an experience. It's really hard to put into words, actually. You have all the anxieties and all the fears of any troop going in, TI screaming and yelling and that type of thing. But I tell you what, you really did learn a lot about military and military discipline, that sort of thing. And it's an experience I'll never forget. I'm glad I did it.
Okay. All right. What was your first assignment out of basic?
Well, I left basic training, went to tech school in Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas, where I learned to become an aircraft mechanic, jet engines 1 and 2. So I worked on fighter type aircraft as a crew chief. But they let me come home for 30 days, even though I didn't have that amount of time accrued, because my immediate first duty station was going to be overseas at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines.
Okay.
So I came home for a short time and then straight to the Philippines there, where I spent a tour of 2 years. And then rotated back to the States for a while.
Okay. Is there anything you'd like to say about your time as an aircraft mechanic?
Well, that was a great job. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I love being around aircraft. Again, I worked with fighter type aircraft. I started out, once I got to Clark Air Force Base, they put me on the old F4Cs, C model, D model, and E model aircraft. The F4 was like the workhorse during the Vietnam War. It could carry a really heavy payload of bombs and that sort of thing, and they could use it for both fighter aircraft doing intercept type things, or fighting off other aircraft, or they could also use it on bombing missions and that sort of thing. So it was quite the workhorse, and Clark Air Base had tons of them. They must have had 80 to 100 F4s there. But I got fortunate there. I got to work in what they called Combat Sage while I was there, which was a part of the base flight squadron. And we had all transient aircraft that would come in from other bases, and they would come and they would stay about 1 week, and they would bring their own live ammunition and missiles and stuff with them. And they would do some training where we would send up a fake aircraft known as a drone. And these transient pilots, they would come in for this training, and they would go up and actually try to lock on and shoot down a drone, just as practice. And if they actually shot down a drone, it was really pretty cool, because they would come back and we would do the maintenance on their aircraft while the pilots took time off. and they would always buy the crew chief a case of beer if they got a shoot down, and we would paint a little small picture of a drone on the side of the variable ramp of the aircraft to show that they did in fact get a hit, so they could go back and be heroes at their home squadrons once they left. So it was a great duty.
Okay, what were some of the specific type things you did there?
As aircraft maintenance wise, yes. Well, we did primarily, our jobs was inspections of aircraft. We did pre-flight inspections, through-flight inspections, and post-flight inspections of the aircraft, looking for any type of maintenance problems at all. And then we would, of course, document those in the logs and the books. And then we went about repairing, any discrepancies that were in those log books. So we did everything from refueling and servicing the things to changing tires to changing a whole wing if we had to, or pulling an engine out and replacing it and that kind of thing. So it was just overall maintenance of the aircraft.
Were most of the engine rebuilds, were they sent off?
Well, we had engine troops, they called them. You always have aircraft maintenance in the Air Force is broken down into different entities, I guess you would call it. You have avionics, and these guys, they come out and work only on the instruments of the aircraft, such as are in the cockpit. You also had munitions. They did all the loading of bombs and that sort of thing. We had engine troops. Our job as crew chiefs was to help roll that engine back, pull that engine out of the frame of the aircraft itself and onto a dolly. Once we got it to that point, then the engine troops would actually do any maintenance on the engines and that sort of thing.
I see.
Then they'd bring the engine back out to us once it was completed, and we would help reinstall it into the aircraft, that kind of thing. So yeah, you have a lot of specialties when it comes to that aircraft maintenance.
Was there ongoing training during that time, or was it?
Oh yeah. I don't think training ever stops. Of course, you go to your tech school and that sort of thing, and it was. I can't remember how many months that lasted. I would say from September till December. So we had about four or 5 months there of training, and then once you get to your first duty station, they have what they call CDC courses, or continued training, that you went to periodically. And I retrained on, they trained me not only on the F-4s, but T-38s, F-5s, T-39, other types of aircraft. And then of course you always have your technical orders and all your books that you're constantly going through as you do your job. So it's always ongoing.
Okay, all right. Moving forward, what was your next assigned duty?
Okay, I left Clark Air Force Base, and I transferred back here to stateside. I was stationed at the 48th Fighter Intercept Squadron down at Langley Air Force Base, Virginia. That was, I believe, between the years of 77 and 78. For about a year I was there. While there, I worked on in what they call the 48th Intercept Squadron, and we worked on the old F-106 Delta Darts, they call them. Older aircraft, but they used it for intercept missions. It was one of the fastest aircraft, I guess, that they had at the time, back in the 70s, and they used that to chase suspicious aircraft up the coast. If they came too close to the United States coast, we would scramble an F-106 or two, and they'd chase that aircraft up the coast to kind of intercept them and find out what they're up to.
I see. Okay. Well, moving forward from there.
Okay. Well, from there, it was kind of an interesting story. Once I got at Clark Air Force Base, at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, I had gone over to the base credit union to get a car loan. I wanted to buy a little car while I was down in Virginia there. And I ran across my old squadron commander from Clark Air Force Base that I had worked for when I was at Clark. And his name was Colonel Drew. He was one of the youngest full-bird colonels in the Air Force at the time. He was a fighter pilot, had flown the F-4s while he was at Clark, but they had transferred him to Langley Air Force Base to fly the new F-15 at the time. It had just come out. And when I ran across him in the credit union, he asked me, he goes, "Aaron," he goes, "if there's anything," he said, "my number's in the phone book. If there's anything you ever need from me, just you give me a call." And I said, well, I can tell you right now, sir, there's way too much brass here at Langley Air Force Base. Too many officers, and the NASA was there, the FBI headquarters was there. Just too much going on for me. And I was used to that more of a laid-back type of thing like overseas. So it kind of jokingly, I told him, I said, I'd like to go back to Clark Air Force Base if you could get me orders. And he just laughed at me, and we just had a good, really friendly conversation there. But 6 months later, for some reason, I had orders to go back to Clark, and so I ended up back at Clark for another tour.
So, I see. Yes. Doing the same aircraft maintenance?
Doing aircraft maintenance, same thing.
Okay.
And at that point, after that tour, is when my first enlistment had terminated, so I had got my honorable discharge and gotten out and came back and went to school at that time.
Okay. All right. You'd written that some other job duties, I guess that would have been after the Air Force.
Yes, when I was with the West Virginia Army National Guard, the 3 years while I was going through college, I actually started out with them as a administrative clerk typist. I worked in the orderly room. I did a lot of just administrative duties, that sort of thing, kept people's pay and things like that straight, their leave time and things of that nature. And it was really just a lot of paperwork. And I would say about 2.5 years into that duty with the Army there, they had approached me and asked if I would be interested in going to their officer candidacy school, which was a program held up at Camp Dawson in Kingwood. And it took about a year to go through that program. So I started into that because they had promised me that I could get helicopters. I'd be able to get back on helicopters and maybe fly helicopters and that sort of thing. And then me in aviation, I was all about that, So I jumped on that opportunity, and I made it about halfway through that program, and they came back to me and said that the state of West Virginia was in dire need of field artillery officers, and because my home unit was a field artillery unit, that I was probably not going to get the helicopters that I had been promised or had been mentioned to me. And I would probably end up being a field artillery officer. And that really didn't sit too well with me, so I started looking around at the Air Force again, and about halfway through that OCS program with the Army Guard, I let my enlistment run out, and I got my honorable discharge and got out of the Army, and then subsequently went back into the Air Force Reserves in Pittsburg. Now in Pittsburg, I started out actually as an interior electrician, and that was only because they didn't have any slots available for any aircraft maintenance or anything at the base. So I did that for several years, and then transferred up to their social squadron, and I was a drug and alcohol counselor, and also worked the other side of the office, which was base human relations counselor as well. And I did that for a couple years. And I saw that with the reserve unit, I really wasn't going to be able to get around aircraft again like I really wanted. So that's when I made my final decision to transfer to the Pennsylvania Air National Guard, which was at the same airport, the Pittsburg International Airport, but just across the runway or two. So there was another whole unit right over there that I'd been looking at the whole time and just hadn't given them much consideration until I just realized I wasn't going to be able to get what I wanted with the Air Force Reserves. So I transferred to the Air Guard, and they started me out my first year. They got me as close as they could to the flight line, and that was I was an aircraft maintenance production controller, which means I basically worked in a big, huge control room with all these boards and a lot of scribble and stuff on boards and stuff, and we monitored all of the maintenance that was taking place on the 21 KC-135 aircraft that they had stationed there. And we would also dispense the different maintenance shops. We'd send them out to the aircraft to do their job. We'd keep track of all the maintenance that was going on and that sort of thing. And that was a really good job. I enjoyed that. I learned a lot about the ins and outs of how the whole maintenance project works. But then a great opportunity came my way where one of the other maintenance controllers asked me if I'd ever seen a refuel mission. Had I actually gone up on the aircraft and watched them refuel another aircraft in the air? And I'd never seen that happen. She said, and so she told me, well, you know, you can do that. I'll call up the base ops and set you up an appointment. So I went up there and I flew with them, and lo and behold, I was sold on that job. I knew I had to have it, but they were very few and hard to come by. But I would say within a few months after I had done that initial flight and learned a little bit about it, 2 positions did come open as a boom operator on KC-135. And I put my application in. I had to go in front of the board there on base, which was included the base commander and the squadron commanders, the chief boom operators of the 2 different squadrons that they had there. And lo and behold, I was one of, out of I think 80 some applicants, I was one of 2 that they selected to fill the position. So they sent me away at the tune of $92,000 out to Altus, Oklahoma, and trained me to be a boom operator and do aerial refueling. And so that's where I ended up my career as a boom operator in the Air Force there.
Okay. Was most of that it was here in the States?
Oh yeah, yeah, we did. Well, now as a boom operator and working on that type of an aircraft, you pretty much travel the world though. We were based out of Pittsburg, but we traveled just about everywhere. Matter of fact, I probably traveled more in that job while in the military than any other job that I'd ever had. I mean, it would be nothing to take off on a flight, fly to Alaska, spend a few days there, fly to Hawaii, transferring troops or whatever, and doing refuel missions on the process. I remember one particular year, I think right after I came out of my training for that, that within 3 months, I'd say the months of February through April, I had been with that unit as a boom operator. I had been to Puerto Rico, the Azores, England, Germany, Italy, you know, all in 3 months. So that, I mean, that's the kind of travel that you did. And so we were, you know, like I say, we were based out of Pittsburgh, but we were all over the world.
For how long a period did you do that type of thing?
Let's see, that was my last, I joined that unit in 1995, and I retired in 2001. So from 95 to 96, I was actually working as a maintenance controller. Then from 96 until 2001, what is that? How many years? Let's see, 5. It's about 6. Yeah, about 6 years. About 5 years as a boom operator. Yeah.
Okay. Backtracking just a bit. Is there anything you'd like to say about your time as working as a drug and alcohol counselor?
Oh, that was great duty. I enjoyed that. Now, that again was with the Air Force Reserves, and the way the Reserves works is typically you do your 1 weekend a month and then 2 weeks in the summer, that sort of thing. So I still had a civilian job as well. I worked for the Federal Bureau of Prisons as a correctional counselor with them. So counseling, and that's what my degrees were in social work and sociology when I had gone to college. So counseling was a big part of my life at that time. And I thought that, well, maybe I could apply that in the Air Force as well. So I did. I applied for the drug and alcohol counseling job, and I got that. And I worked it for about 2 years, actually. The Air Force, they don't have a lot of tolerance, or didn't at the time have a lot of tolerance for the use of any type of illegal drug or the misuse of any legal drug. And so if basically, it was a very short process for a person that was determined to have been misusing drugs in any shape or form. We basically just we counsel them, and then actually take them through the process of basically booting them out of the Air Force. They just and then we'd do some follow-up if they needed some follow-up or some follow-up care or something like that. We would try to find them the follow-up on the civilian side of things to help them with their problem. But the Air Force was pretty much, they were pretty adamant about if you were misusing drugs in any way, you were simply dishonorably discharged or general discharge. So we basically just took them through that process. Now the other side of that office was the base human relations office, and what we worked with there, we worked with any type of say sexual harassment cases, cases of racism on base, and those types of things. So, and we would hold a lot of times we taught a lot of classes in both of those areas, in the drug and alcohol related areas, as well as the base human relations side. And when I say we would teach classes, generally any newcomers to the base, any new persons transferring to our base from another base, for instance, or somebody just newly joining the military as a reservist, we would put them through initial courses and things like that to teach them what the Air Force's policies were on all of those types of things. And I mean, it was very rewarding. But I think what happened with me on that was that I did a lot of that on the civilian side of things, and I always kind of liked the military as being in the military because it gave me something different that I could do other than the counseling thing every day. So after about 2 years of doing counseling in both my civilian job and my military job, it just kind of got old, so I started looking around. I wanted to get back on aircraft, so that's what I did.
Okay. Specifically for this type of area, and you being African American, did you face? Is there anything you'd like to talk about, or any experiences you faced with racism?
In the military, or just in the area, or how would you mean?
In the military, in this area.
Military, I never really had any problems at all, to be honest. Not that nothing significant that I can recall. I was always treated really well in the military. I mean, and to me, probably even better so than on the civilian side of life. And the reason I say that was the military had some pretty, I guess, forward thinking or more progressive ways of dealing with those types of things and those types of issues. When you're in the military, you don't have time. I mean, if you're in a combat situation, you don't have the luxury or the time or whatever you want to call it of disliking a person because of their skin color or something, when that person may be the very person that's going to save your life. You know? So you learn, it truly becomes a brotherhood when you're in the military. And people just, it's just like there's no time for that. And the military doesn't have time for a lot of that kind of thing. Now, I will say that when I first went into Clark Air Base, Vietnam was still taking place. It was still ongoing. And when I first got to Clark Air Force Base, it was kind of like racially polarized. It really was, and a lot of that had to do, I guess, with the times where, I mean, if you remember back in the 50s and 60s, the civil rights movement was really going on strong here in the United States, and blacks fighting for equal rights and that sort of thing. And a lot of the jobs that blacks were pretty much left with during that time were, they graduated high school. In order to find work, they just went into the military. So you had, percentage-wise, you had more blacks in the military probably serving than you had of any other race in terms of percentage, not actual numbers, but in terms of percentage. Well, a lot of those black soldiers and stuff would end up in places like Vietnam. And then again, you had with the things that were taking place here in the States, guys fighting over in Vietnam, and even North Vietnam kind of got into that a little bit through propaganda and other things, and they would speak to or get information out to black military members and convince them that, well, you know, you don't even have your own rights back in America, but yet you're over here fighting for a country and you can't even go back home and get a job and that kind of thing. So there were a lot of resentments and there was a lot of anger about that type of thing when I got to Clark Air Force Base. And I noticed that the base was, I mean, it was very racially polarized when I first got there. And coming from a little small town here in West Virginia, where the majority of all of my friends were not black, but they mostly were white, you know, and there was only a handful of black families in Grafton at that time. So I wasn't accustomed to that. I wasn't used to that type of thing, that type of treatment and everything. So when I got over there, I mean, I kind of stood out myself like a sore thumb among other black troops and stuff like that. But it didn't take long that after Vietnam was finally over in '75, that the base gradually started becoming a better place to be. A lot of those old resentments, a lot of the troops coming out of Vietnam who were there at Clark would transfer back to the States and that sort of thing. And after a while, it just kind of cleaned itself up. And by the time I went back to Clark Air Base on my second tour, it was nothing like it was the first time. And so I would say that's probably the only thing that I remembered as far as racism in the military. But there again, it wasn't like fighting and bickering amongst troops. It was just that, like I say, black troops kind of did their thing and white troops kind of did their thing, and everybody just kind of stayed separate. And but it was very noticeable, I remember. And
same thing with downtime.
Even on downtime, yeah. You could go to the dining hall and it'd be like walking into a prison dining hall. You had all the blacks over here and all the whites over here and all the Mexican guys were sitting back here, and it was just like that. But like I say, the second time I was there, things had changed so much it was nothing like that at all. So, and that was a big plus. And I think it was just the era. It was that whole Vietnam thing, and it just carried over at the Clark Air Base. And when I say carried over, I mean a lot of the guys coming out of Vietnam would come to Clark Air Force Base to finish up their overseas tours before they would ship them back to the States. So these were guys who'd been in the soup, so to speak, and they were, they were just coming out of Vietnam. They had a lot of resentments and a lot of anger and things like that. But it cleaned itself up in time.
Okay. Is there anything you'd like to say on a local level here?
Well, West Virginia, it's a great place. I mean, even when I served with the West Virginia Army National Guard, I was treated pretty decent and well. I have no regrets whatsoever in serving in the military here locally, like I say, in the West Virginia Army Guard, or even when I was up in Pittsburg with the reserves and the Air National Guard there. It was just awesome duty. I mean, to me, it was an honor and a privilege to have served, and I have absolutely no regrets whatsoever.
Okay, all right. Were there any problems that arose during any time of your service, mostly probably overseas, with women in the military?
No. I remember when I was going through technical training to be an aircraft mechanic, we had several women in our class and that sort of thing. The only problem I ever saw in that area is we had, when I got to Clark Air Force Base, we had a couple crew chiefs, female crew chiefs, and it was kind of like there were certain jobs that all crew chiefs would compete for. One of the jobs was what they called it customer service, but it was basically, there was a huge tool room where all the maintenance people, where all the tools were kept for all the maintenance people, and a lot of the guys working out on the flight line, actually working on aircraft, they would compete to get those types of jobs every so often, so they could get a break from working out there in the heat all the time. They could come inside and work the tool room and stuff. So those were jobs that a lot of the crew chiefs competed for. Well, the problem that I saw that had occurred over there is that there were some of the women, the maintenance work was some pretty heavy lifting and that type of thing sometimes. Sometimes you had to jack an aircraft or something like that to change a tire. And some of the women, physically, it was a very tough and demanding thing for them. So a lot of times they may not be able to really do some of those things. So in order to make things a little more workable for them, they would put them in customer service ahead of the guys who were competing for it. So at times you would get guys who would be very upset because they're working really hard to get that little relief, but then they would put some of the women in there simply because they weren't able to do the heavier work on the flight line. And some guys would get a little upset about that, but I never really saw anything serious. But those were things you'd hear guys talk about on the sides.
Did you have any interaction with any foreign nationals during your career?
Oh yeah, especially in the Philippines there. I mean, you walk off base, you're right in the midst, and but it was always a good time. Now when speaking of foreign nationals, I mean, I never had any real contact with any, say, higher level or dignitaries or anything, but just the common folk around town, say, it was
civilians?
Called civilians, Angeles City, and that sort of thing. And everybody there in the Philippines, especially in Angeles City, they spoke their own native language of Tagalog, but they also spoke English very well. So it was there was never a problem communicating. And we always had a good time. Yeah, it was a good place to be. Clark Air Base.
Is there anything you'd like to mention about your downtime there? I mean, when you actually did get to go out and
just, well, it was a GI town. I'll definitely say that. And by that I mean most of the businesses downtown were businesses that would cater to the desires and the needs of GIs, so to speak. So of course you had a lot of bars. Yeah. You had, but you also had like a lot of things like shopping centers and things like that, where you could go purchase items that you just couldn't generally find here in the United States and that kind of thing, and find them at real cheap prices and that kind of thing. So everything was geared around the base. It was almost a base-made town, I guess you would say. And and the dollar to what they called, they had pesos, that was their dollar. The dollar bill to peso exchange rate was always like 8 to 1. You know, you get 8 of their pesos for 1 of your dollars, so you were like 8 times richer than what you normally were. So your money went a lot further overseas like that. And that exchange rate, it fluctuated. I mean, the highest I'd seen was probably like 9 or 10 to 1. But my younger brother, he was in the Air Force as well. He had gone over at a point in time where it was like way up there around 21 to 1. So your money just went a lot further. And with the things, like I say, they provided, they catered to the GIs over there. So you pretty much get what you wanted over there. So it was just a good time.
Were you able to get any goods to bring home or to send home?
Yeah. I'd send a lot of wood carvings and things like that home. I know my mother used to love like little knickknacks for her coffee tables and things like that. And I would purchase a lot of things like that, especially around Christmas time and stuff like that. And I'd just ship that kind of thing home. And then I brought home a lot of stuff of my own, and I still have a lot of that stuff still in storage. But matter of fact, the pictures up here on the wall, those came from the Philippines. Those were hand painted. I think I paid $10 for that set of pictures. And that's, I mean, equivalent to American money. It would be about $10 is what I paid. But the guy painted those for me. I mean, you couldn't just walk into say a store and say and just buy a picture. You had to go in there and show them what you want, and then come back in a week and they'd have it for you. They paint it for you. I mean, that was everything from say buying a picture to buying a pair of shoes downtown. You'd go downtown, you couldn't just buy shoes off the rack. They'd have to make them for you. So yeah, so it was really everything was custom made, I guess you would say.
Was there ever any trouble sending things back?
No, not really. Now a lot of times guys would go over there and they would really go wild at buying and purchasing and things because they knew that they would never find it anywhere else, find those items anywhere else. And you were limited in terms of how much you could actually, let's say if I was going to transfer from that base back stateside to another base, like when I left there to go to Langley, I was only allowed so many pounds of what they called whole baggage or whatever, where the military will pack everything up and crate it up for you and ship it back. I couldn't exceed my limits in terms of weight. But actually that limit was so high, I mean, I never did come close to it, even as a single person at that time. And if you were married, of course, with family, then that that limit was increased. So, but I never had any problems with all, and they shipped everything back that I had purchased and wanted to keep. Now I've seen they did have what they called merchandise control over there, and this is for shopping on base in the BXs and that sort of thing. One of the problems they had over there a lot was people would go in and they would buy, say, American-made goods and things at the BX, and then they'd like to take them downtown and sell them on the black market down there because the citizens of the Philippines there weren't able to get those types of items for themselves off base anywhere.
Would have been like alcohol?
Well, alcohol was a big one. Cigarettes was another big one. Things like everything, like even your kitchen appliances, like refrigerators, stoves, television sets, any electronics. Those were always big items over there. And I remember one time there was a big investigation ongoing by the what did they call the Air Force? I can't remember. There was a acronym for that, but I can't remember what it is. But they were doing a big investigation, and there were members, there were officials on the base as high up as the base commander's office that were involved in this big black marketing thing that was going on over there at one time. And but yeah, black. I guess anytime you go to a sort of a third world country, you're going to have those kind of things taking place.
Did you ever see or hear anything about drug abuse or anything there?
Oh yeah, you'd see it all the time, especially those guys coming back from Vietnam and stuff. And I won't mention actual names, but I'll say that when I first got there, January of '75, my roommate, my very first experience there is my plane landed somewhere around noon, and I stepped off the plane into like 120-degree temperatures after leaving West Virginia, where I'd come home for 30 days and it was snow and ice. And I stepped off the plane over there, 120-some degrees, and went up to they took me up to my my dorm where I would be, where my housing would be, and I was introduced to my first sergeant there, who gave me a briefing and stuff, and then he took me upstairs and gave me my dorm room, where I would be sharing a room with another gentleman there. And the other guy that I was sharing a room with was at work because it was midday. And so I laid down on my the empty bed there and went to sleep, because after an 18-hour flight I was a little bit tired. Well, around 4 o'clock, I heard my roommate coming in the door, and he was coming in with a buddy of his, and I heard him say, the very words came out of his mouth was, "He better be cool, he's my room dog." And that woke me up, and I sat up and looked behind me to see who was coming in the door there. And well, he brought in another friend of his, and I just remember looking at these guys, I'm thinking, wow, these guys look kind of rough looking, you know? And they did. My roommate sat down in a chair right adjacent from where I was sleeping there, and he pulled up a little coffee table in front of him, and the other guy that was with him sat right on the edge of my bed, and I'm sitting here, and he sits right on the edge of my bed. And they opened up a tinfoil, and one guy had a fingernail, must have been that long, and he shoved his fingernail in some powder and snorted it right up his nose, and it fell right back on top of me. That was my first experience at Clark Air Base. And I was writing letters home to Mom, I don't know if I can deal with this. But again, all of that, both of these guys, I mean, I later learned, you know, I mean, I didn't know this right at the moment, but these guys had come out of Vietnam, see, and the drug problem was definitely a problem at that time, and it was with them. And yeah, I mean, I saw it, and then at times the police, the security police, Air Force security police, would bring the dogs through the dorm quite often, searching for things like that. And I can recall several busts being made, like down the hall somewhere, somebody, or this.
Was there more tolerance at that time than later?
There was, and I can say, I remember we had another crew chief one time that he left, and I think they did a TDY, temporary duty, from Clark Air Base. They went to Thailand, I believe it was, or it may have been Vietnam. I can't remember which it was. But anyway, he was coming back from there back to Clark Air Force Base, and in the process he tried to sneak some, I think it was marijuana basically, in his toolbox back with him, and he got caught. And I remember all that they did to him is they slapped him on the wrist and told him never to do it again. Okay, and whereas today, if that were to happen, it's almost an international incident. You know? But I do remember that same person got later transferred to another duty station in Holloman, New Mexico, and he tried to do the same thing down there. This was the word that I had gotten back, and I mean, it's not anything official, but I did hear that he tried that in New Mexico, and the last I heard, he was doing some time at Leavenworth for that. So they treated things much more seriously, and the punishments were much more severe stateside than they were at places like Clark Air Base at that time. But yeah, it was.
Okay. You were able to use the GI Bill.
Yes, I was. Yeah, that I had, I guess, what they called the regular GI Bill. I'd gone in, like I say, in '74 and got out in '79, and the way that worked is, well, the new Montgomery GI Bill that they came up with later, as an active duty member, you paid so much into that, and the government matched so much of that, and then when you got out, you had this savings that you could use to go to school. Well, with the regular GI Bill that was in existence before the Montgomery GI Bill, you just simply served your time. You didn't have to pay anything into anything. You just got out after, with your honorable discharge, whenever your time was up, and you had all this money just sitting there waiting on you to go to school, to use to go to school. So that's, had it not been for the GI Bill, I probably would have never gotten my college education.
And you said you went to college at
Fairmont State. It was called Fairmont State College, yeah, but it's Fairmont State University now. But yeah, I spent 4 years there, going to school, regular GI Bill, And then my brother, like I said, talked me into joining the Army National Guard. And the way that that worked is as long as I kept a C average, then the West Virginia Army National Guard would pay my tuition, and I still got all the money from my regular GI Bill. So I had all this money coming in from serving in the military. Like I said, West Virginia Guard was paying my tuition, and I still had my monies come in from my GI Bill. I got kind of fortunate in that I had a free place to stay at the Wesley Foundation at the foot of the hill of the campus, which was a religious organization. It dealt with campus ministry, and I knew the Reverend Boyer there. And my mother used to be a secretary there at one time. But they had a whole upstairs attic that they had converted into living area. And so in lieu of paying rent or anything, we just had to clean up the first floor, second floor offices, and of course keep our own living area up there clean, and shovel snow in the winter and cut grass in the summer. And so in lieu of all that, we had a free place to stay, my brother and I. So I had all my GI Bill, and I had my little part-time job at the Army National Guard, and, and it's a free place to stay. I had it made in college, didn't realize it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Have you made use of the VA services at all?
The hospital services, even from time to time, like I'll go. As a matter of fact, I'm scheduled for my yearly physical coming up in January this year. They've already called me 17th, but I go over there usually for services like that. But my health has always been pretty good. I do have some issues with a little bit of high blood pressure. It's not bad, but they monitor that kind of thing for me. But never had any serious medical problems or anything. But
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Would you do anything differently now that's in your past? I mean, think of...
Would I do any of that differently?
Yes.
Yeah. I think the one thing I would have done, when I first got off of active duty after my first enlistment and came back and went to college, my whole purpose for doing that really was I wanted to go back in the Air Force as an officer. And it took a college degree to be an officer in the Air Force, and it still does. But I think I would have gone about that a different way. Instead of getting out, the Air Force had at that time, they had a program called Bootstrap, and which means you could stay in the military, but yet go to school full time, get your degree, and then get your commission. Okay, I would have probably chosen that program as opposed to getting out and going to school, full time as a civilian, basically. That way, I could have assured myself getting back in a placement in the Air Force as an officer. Because once I graduated Fairmont State with degrees in social work and sociology, there were just certain courses I didn't have to have in my curriculum. I didn't need a lot of math. I didn't need a lot of the harder sciences like chemistry and physics and that sort of thing. Well, by the time I graduated and then started looking again at going back into the Air Force, all of a sudden Vietnam was over, and now they were at a place where they could be really picky and choosy about who they accepted as officers. And at the time they needed a lot of engineers, so they were looking for people with engineering degrees. So they wouldn't even consider me really. Yeah. So I stayed in the Army Guard, and I started into their OCS program there. But yeah, I think that's the only thing I would have done differently. Okay.
Is there any advice that you would give to individuals that are thinking about joining the military or possibly in the military right now?
I would always encourage anybody to serve. Not only does it, are you doing a great service for your country, which is first and foremost, but at the same time, I mean, it's a great opportunity, especially if in today's economy where it's hard to find work and things, especially like right out of high school or something like that. And not everybody is ready to go straight into college. I wasn't ready to go to college right out of high school. Had I probably started, I would probably failed. Okay, and it gave me the time to actually be trained in something that I enjoyed working at, to learn a little bit about life. Okay, and then after 5 years, I was ready for school. I mean, I knew what it would take to make it out there. After being out there in the workforce for a while, working in the military, I could see what it would actually take to make it. And I knew that going back and maybe furthering my education would be a big plus. And at the same time, like I say, it was a full-time job. I mean, sometimes you work. It was easy to work 12, sometimes 18-hour shifts in the military. You're on call 24 hours a day, but they don't always work you that. But you are on call. But and then again, there's always all the other benefits for being a veteran, you know. And I've tried encouraging my oldest son right now, he's in his 20s right now, but you know, I never force anything on anybody, but I always encourage, and I encourage him to do so, and I would encourage anyone that ever came to me. And I've probably directed a few people to the military over the years. So, yeah.
Okay. Is there anything you'd like to add? Should you think of?
Well, the only thing I could add now, I guess that whole chapter of my life is pretty much a past chapter. I guess the only thing I do now, I mean, I still love military, I still love being around veterans and that sort of thing. So to kind of, you know, I miss the structure. I really do, the military structure and just the way things work and all the camaraderie and all that type of thing, all the buddies and all that. So what I've done just to more appease myself and maybe some others is I've started my own what I call Veteran Bikers Motorcycle Club. And that's our club. And we just got registered with the state back in April of this year. But basically, what we're about, we are about what we call the Greater Four, and that is God, Constitution, country, and our nation's veterans. And we believe in riding in such a way as to bring honor and respect to that Greater Four. So we're all about doing everything that we can to bring our country back to the principles of our founding fathers, while at the same time recognizing and supporting veterans in any way that we possibly can. So we're looking at doing a lot of things like maybe working with the Veterans Administration, doing some volunteer work at the VA hospital. We also ride a lot of times with the Patriot Guard Riders. I'm not sure if you've heard of them, but anytime a service member or a veteran passes away, either killed in combat or some retired gentleman that passes away, if their family requests, we'll do a flag line, a motorcycle escort and flag lines at their funerals and things like that in graveside. We have a thing coming up here next weekend. It's called Reefs Across America, where monies have been set aside to provide wreaths for all the graves in national cemeteries and state veteran cemeteries. And so we're going to take part in that program next Saturday there in Grafton and in Town, which is the two national cemeteries here in West Virginia. And then we're working on another project called the Aubrey Stewart Project, where they're going to. Aubrey Stewart was one of 11 black soldiers during World War II. During the time when units were segregated in the military, their unit got overrun by the Germans, and 11 of them, well, some of them escaped capture. 11 black soldiers had escaped, and held up in a home in Belgium, Worth, Belgium, and the family that hid them there they were all about protecting them, but there were some other families in the town that were afraid of the Germans that gave up their location, and the Germans captured them, and instead of taking them to a POW camp, they took them out into a field and mutilated them and killed them. Well, those 11 soldiers became heroes to the town of Worth, Belgium, and every year they've always celebrated what they did for them back in 1940s something. I can't remember the exact year that occurred, but one of those soldiers was a West Virginia native. His name was Aubrey Stewart. He was from Piedmont, which is just outside of Kaiser, West Virginia. And they're going to be dedicating his home, making it a museum in memory of what those 11 soldiers had done. And we're going over there. Our motorcycle club is going to go over there and do the flag line and honor that ceremony as well. So we do those types of things. Just to stay involved with veterans.
How long have you been involved in this organization?
Well, I'm the founder and the owner of the organization, and I actually started working on that and getting us up and running back in August of 2010. But it wasn't until, again, April of 2011, this year, that we actually got registered with the state as a nonprofit. So,
I see.
So I guess we have about 59, almost 60 members now, and not all.
Still growing.
Yeah, we're still growing. Some of those are what we call full colors members, who are veterans, and then some of them are what we call associate members, who are non-veterans. So, and It doesn't matter. We don't discriminate against race, color, national origin, gender, whatever. Just if you're somebody that supports veterans and supports the Constitution of the United States and believes firmly in God and that kind of thing, then yeah, you're more than welcome to visit our website and join up.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank you for taking time to do this interview with us, and I also especially want to thank you for your service to our country, sir.
Okay. Well, like I say, it was a privilege and an honor. Okay. Thank you.